going to go on to Jim now, and Jim's going to answer some of those questions that people were asking, really, about how they can, how you can engage people wider. So hopefully Jim's camera and microphone will be starting shortly. And he'll appear. There he is. Jim, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Thanks for the invitation to speak at this webinar today. A particular thanks to Alistair, who I think has set the context of MOOCs out extremely clearly, and I will perhaps start by just emphasising a couple of things he said. The first thing is, don't judge them yet, because this is very much a work in progress. And the second one, I guess, was about competition, and these are not really, well, some versions of MOOCs are not competition in any real sense, because they're not substitutable products for many of the higher education courses and so on. So what I want to tell you about is Strathclyde's experience of MOOCs. So this is one particular story about one particular MOOC. It's the first MOOC run by the University of Strathclyde. We partnered with FutureLearn. According to FutureLearn, it's their most successful MOOC to date, and I can give you some indications of what they mean by successful in terms of some of the kind of factual aspects of it. There were 27,000 participants in 120 countries, 18,000 active learners, 64,000 comments throughout the 6-week program, and a completion rate that started as high as 46 and then dropped down to 28, which apparently is very high for MOOCs. So FutureLearn were very pleased with this. This was our first MOOC. We felt we had a good story to tell, and I'm going to come on to stories particularly in a moment, but nobody had any idea how this was really going to pan out. There are a couple of things that I think are worth mentioning here that seem to be getting passed by in some discussions I've seen about MOOCs. And I think the first thing is that there was a great deal of effort put into the production of this MOOC. It was a very high quality production in terms of visuals and so on. I don't mean it was cinematographic. There's a balance to be struck between something you record on an iPhone and something you see at the cinema, but we seem to get that reasonably correct, and it seemed to work very well. Another key factor for me is that we had the content was marshalled by a very experienced academic and practitioner team. So we were very, very familiar with the content, and that I think told. And then the final point, which is not something that we anticipated, so you might, if this was a business, you might call this an emergent strategy. We didn't anticipate this when we started out, is that the storytelling element of it, the crime scene to court element of it, seemed to have worked extremely well for engaging learners. Now, there is a particular aspect of that which we had to kind of dig our heels in with FutureLearn, because FutureLearn wanted to put all 6 weeks of the program online at the same time. Now, we are very experienced at teaching forensic science, and part of the learning process in forensic science is to present something, describe a problem, and leave people to figure the problem out, then come back and talk about that solution, then move on to the next problem. We were not at all keen to put all this story up all at once, because we thought people would simply go to the end of it, find out what the answer was, and not necessarily engage. And that was a bit of a showstopper for us, and in fact FutureLearn had the good sense to realise that that was something that was worth holding on to. I'm just going to say one more thing about the storytelling aspects, and I can deal with any issues that might come up in the discussions, but you may think that forensic science is all about facts and science and all the rest of it, but if you ask a lawyer or an advocate who presents cases in court what convicts people, they'll tell you that it's stories that convict people. It's not the facts, it's the stories that the prosecution and the defence weave around those facts and how they go about convincing a jury. Now, we knew that beforehand, but we weren't thinking about it when we were designing the MOOC, but that obviously played into it in terms of how it was received. A couple of slides now about the structure and the content. They're quite detailed, so I'm going to describe them. It's only a 10-minute presentation, so I just want to give a kind of flavour. It was a 6-week course. Each week was split up into a separate topic. I've got that in the next slide. Every week started with an introductory video. We had themed discussions ongoing. We had subject-specific material for people to read and engage with. We had activities every week. So, for example, we had people making shoe prints or shoe marks. We had people making their own finger marks. We had quizzes. And, of course, at every session, we updated on what happened in the case, the crime scene, the post-mortem, the blood patterns, the firearms examination, and the various twists and turns in the case. And I won't tell you about the twists and turns in case you decide to do it, because we're going to rerun it in January next year. If we look now at so that was how we looked at a single topic, and we used a lot of different media to get that across. And this was essentially the structure of the whole MOOC in 6 weeks. A week's introduction. In that we had 3 Google Hangouts throughout the whole MOOC, and they were at particular points in the course that were important. We also had a poll at the end of the course, and it was quite interesting how it came out. It's a bit like I imagine the Scottish referendum is going to come out. I think there was a 51% of the people who voted said the suspect should have been convicted, and 49 said he should not be convicted. So it was very finely balanced and shows a lot of engagement. We had activity polls at different stages, and these merged with the Hangouts in the different thematic areas and different subject areas, where we had subject-specific questions. But as we progressed through the course, through the MOOC, it became much more integrative. You could know, by the time you got to the end of it, you couldn't think about DNA or fingerprints or these other types of evidence as separate types of evidence. You had to see them as mechanisms to solve a problem, and the problem was. Final slide here, just to give some reflections on how it was for us as we actually delivered it. And again, this links back to Alistair's comments. Nobody had any real idea how much resources or time or funding were needed for this, and I guess my short answer to anyone looking for guidance is more than you think, and never enough. We had a lot of effort spent just on the content, as you would imagine, selecting it, editing it, lots of scripts being written for videos, a great deal of work that we weren't necessarily familiar with, because it was being videoed or presented in audio, and it had to be spoken, and we had to engage people in using the spoken word in a very different way from the way we would traditionally engage them in lectures. We were working on a developing platform. FutureLearn were developing as we were developing the MOOC, and it was quite tight at times for us to get clarity about the format and some critical IT aspects of this project as it was delivered. They were all fixed in the end, but there were a lot of anxious moments during the development of it. There were lots of last-minute changes, lots of unanticipated knock-on effects, lots of unanticipated demands, huge amounts of emails, requests for an exam which we didn't anticipate, and exposure to new technologies. I had never done a Google Hangout before. In fact, in practical terms, no different from this kind of presentation. But we literally had a kind of mission control here in the Centre for Forensic Science, where these were ran, where people were in different offices. So we had to rely on people who really understood these technologies very well. So that technological infrastructure was very important. That's my last comment, and obviously I'm here for the duration of the webinar and happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you there. Thanks very much, Jim. I'm just wondering if there's any questions, because we've, again, not got any questions, just disappeared. Oh, how did you seek feedback, says Stella Shaw, Jim?
I'm not sure we kind of actively looked for feedback, but it came our way in terms of the main indicators of the MOOC, in terms of the number of people engaging, the volume of chat that was going on, and the people who were engaging in the different subjects. We also got feedback from FutureLearn, who told us that in their view it was the most successful one that had been run to date, of a relatively small number, I hasten to add. I should also say something else which I forgot to mention, is that the MOOC now runs effectively as a 10 credit bearing module elective in the university. So it is being used as an open learning platform and an open learning source, but it's also being used as a credit bearing module in the University of Strathclyde.
Just
you know,
two more
assessed